October 12, 1944. Aachen, Germany. The city trembled beneath a low gray sky, its cobblestone streets scarred by months of artillery and air raids. American tanks rumbled through the outskirts, their engines shaking the ground and sending dust from ruined walls into the damp autumn air. German units, entrenched in crumbling buildings and behind sandbagged positions, watched with disbelief as armored columns advanced faster than any reconnaissance could predict. Orders from high command had insisted they could hold, that American supply lines would falter, that the Luftwaffe would cover the retreat. None of it mattered now. Inside a shattered schoolhouse, a small detachment of German soldiers huddled, rifles at the ready, eyes darting toward the approaching vehicles. The smell of diesel and gunpowder filled their nostrils, an acrid perfume of inevitability. Across the street, a platoon of American infantry moved with mechanical precision, calling coordinates over radios, directing artillery and signaling tanks forward. Every detail, the pace, the coordination, the noise, was designed to overwhelm, and it did. From the rooftops, German officers tried to gauge the scale. Scouting reports came back fragmented. Columns of Americans appeared where none should have been. Their numbers multiplied by the speed of reinforcements. Radio chatter crackled with unfamiliar codes. From Aachen to the Ruhr, the reality was undeniable. The Americans were not just attacking, they were orchestrating an industrial symphony of war, moving men, vehicles, and artillery with terrifying fluidity. By midday, the first prisoners began to appear. Men who had tried to hold positions, only to be flanked by armored units that seemed to appear from nowhere. The POWs' faces were pale, their confusion etched into every line. They had been trained to expect attrition, to calculate loss, to resist. Instead, they found themselves surrounded not by chaos, but by the unstoppable rhythm of American engineering and coordination. Each advance was measured, each artillery strike precise. The German calculations crumbled, leaving only awe and disbelief. As the afternoon wore on, the Americans methodically cleared buildings, established field hospitals, and set up supply depots behind the front line. German POWs were escorted past rows of trucks, ambulances, and jeeps, their senses overwhelmed by the scale and order of it all. The shock was tangible. They had expected to fight a ragged, exhausted army, not a force that seemed to conjure reinforcements from the very earth. Across the city, signals of American dominance became clearer. Tanks rolled through streets the Germans had thought impassable. Engineers laid temporary bridges across shattered canals. Pilots strafed retreating columns with precision. Every movement was a calculated shock, a demonstration of capability that left captives speechless. They had been trained to fear air raids and artillery, but what they witnessed was strategy, supply, and spirit combined, an unstoppable machine operating with clockwork efficiency. By nightfall, the last German units who had not surrendered melted into the ruins or were captured. The POWs huddled together, whispering about the impossibility of what they had seen. Smoke from demolished bunkers and overturned vehicles rose into the darkening sky. Somewhere in the distance, American engineers lit flares to mark supply routes, creating a glow over the city like a second dawn. Every flash, every explosion, every advance etched the lesson deeper. The enemy was not just strong, he was inexhaustible, creative, and utterly dominant. October 13, 1944. Aachen outskirts and surrounding. Rhine crossings. The morning fog clung to the shattered landscape, swirling around half-collapsed houses and craters where artillery had torn apart streets. German POWs were herded along makeshift paths, their eyes wide as American engineers dismantled, destroyed barricades faster than the enemy could have imagined. Temporary bridges appeared over canals, riveted and reinforced, while the prisoners watched in silent disbelief. Tanks crossed with ease, as if the streets themselves had been prepared for their passage. Behind the front, the Americans had already established field depots, Trucks arrived in endless streams carrying fuel, ammunition, and rations. Radio operators called in coordinates for artillery batteries positioned to strike. German strongpoints before soldiers even reached them. POWs saw rows of medical tents springing up with almost magical speed. Nurses and medics moving with purposeful precision. Every movement was deliberate, calculated, and awe-inspiring. Every obstacle was transformed into an advantage. The Rhine, swollen from autumn rains, could have slowed any army. Yet, American engineers laid pontoon bridges under the cover of early morning smoke. Guided by searchlights and flares, Sherman tanks rumbled across them, followed by half-tracks loaded with infantry. German captives watched their calculations collapse. No one had prepared them for an enemy, capable of turning rivers into highways and rubble into roads in hours. From the air, POWs could see the scale of the American operation. C-47 transports droned overhead, dropping supplies and paratroopers into contested zones. Fighter bombers patrolled, strafing retreating columns and protecting every advance. The sky belonged to America, and the captives' jaws dropped at the synchronization. Air, land, and logistics moving in perfect harmony. One young corporal whispered to his comrade, "This isn't war. This is organized thunder." By midday, the POWs were marched past the outskirts of captured villages. Engineers had converted schools and churches into supply hubs. Bulldozers cleared mines while cranes unloaded jeeps and trucks. The scale of American preparation was staggering. Every detail from rations to shell supply seemed limitless. The German prisoners could only watch as a single American brigade, barely scratched, was reinforced with fresh tanks, artillery, and troops almost immediately. The entire force appeared inexhaustible, as if the enemy's strength was not finite, but a force of nature. In a ruined farmhouse turned temporary headquarters, American officers coordinated with maps, radios, and telephone lines strung hastily across debris. POWs overheard the rapid calculations, schedules for resupply, artillery timings, vehicle maintenance, all delivered with calm precision. They had expected chaos, exhaustion, and error. Instead, they witnessed a machine of war operating at full throttle, and it left them silent. By late afternoon, the POWs were positioned to watch yet another spectacle. Engineers were floating prefabricated pontoon bridges downstream, connecting supply lines from one captured town to another. American trucks moved without pause, hauling fuel and shells to forward positions. Tanks and infantry pushed deeper inland, demolishing resistance as they went. The German captives whispered among themselves, disbelief heavy in every word. How can a single nation move so fast, so efficiently? Even small acts left them astounded. When an American unit stumbled upon a destroyed road, bulldozers were already on site, clearing debris, laying temporary mats, and allowing tanks to advance within minutes. The POWs, accustomed to slow sieges and attrition, could not comprehend the pace, the audacity, the improvisation, the sheer determination. They had been taught that the Wehrmacht's discipline could withstand anything, yet now they faced a force that improved with every obstacle. Nightfall brought no respite for the POWs all. From a hilltop, they observed American searchlights illuminating crossing points and supply lines. Convoys moved under protective fire. Artillery fired in rhythmic bursts, and the engineers continued their work. Every explosion, every light, every engine reinforced the same undeniable truth. The enemy was not just strong, he was unstoppable, relentless, and astonishingly organized. The day ended with POWs in makeshift pens, eyes fixed on the activity around them. They had witnessed bridges erected in minutes, rivers crossed in hours, villages turned into operational hubs overnight. Exhaustion tugged at them, but it was the mental shock that lingered. The realization that they faced a nation whose machinery of war was inseparable from its imagination, courage, and logistics. Silence fell over the prisoners. Not a word could capture the scale of what they had just witnessed. October 14, 1944. Aachen and the Roer River front. The morning fog lifted to reveal streets that were no longer familiar to the POWs. Rubble from ruined homes had been cleared with startling speed, and American engineers had already erected barricades and supply depots along every avenue. Sherman tanks rumbled past, their engines deep and rhythmic, while infantry marched with the precision of a clockwork mechanism. German captives observed in disbelief. The city had been transformed in hours, not days. What they had assumed was chaos was, in fact, a meticulously orchestrated advance. Across the river, American pontoon bridges extended into enemy territory. Tanks, half-tracks, and jeeps poured over them as if the swollen waters were mere puddles. Mortar crews adjusted fire with rapid efficiency, striking German strongpoints before they could mount a defense. POWs craned their necks, eyes wide, as the synchronization unfolded. Artillery, armor, infantry, and engineers moving together, a living, breathing machine of war. The POWs' disbelief intensified when they saw American field hospitals erected in captured villages. Tents and medical supplies appeared overnight, and medics treated wounded soldiers even as shells fell around them. Smoke from burning bunkers mingled with the scent of antiseptics and diesel. Each element, combat, supply, and care, reinforced the same inescapable truth. The Americans were not merely fighting. They were demonstrating the full breadth of a nation mobilized for war. By midday, American planes cut through the gray sky, strafing retreating German units and protecting their own advancing forces. C-47 transports released small reinforcements behind the lines, sometimes in the exact moments needed to prevent counterattacks. POWs whispered among themselves, trying to rationalize what they were seeing. Their training had taught them to fear artillery and tanks, but they had never faced a force that could conjure reinforcements from thin air, control the skies, and sustain relentless momentum. Engineers laid temporary roads and repaired bridges as if following a script written in advance. Trucks loaded with fuel and ammunition moved along these paths without pause. POWs passed columns of artillery, each cannon already sighted and ready to fire. The meticulous organization contrasted sharply with the exhaustion and confusion they themselves felt. Every obstacle the Germans thought would slow the advance was already neutralized, repurposed, or ignored. The captives were marched through villages that had once been fortresses. They saw American soldiers dismantling mines with calm efficiency, erecting observation posts in ruined rooftops, and coordinating with forward units via field radios strung across the city. The speed and coordination were so extreme that some POWs began to question whether they were witnessing reality. One young lieutenant muttered under his breath, "They are everywhere, faster than thought." As afternoon approached, American artillery prepared a coordinated barrage for the final push across the Ruhr River. From the POW's vantage point, the destruction was awe-inspiring. German bunkers were obliterated with pinpoint accuracy, and tanks moved through gaps cleared by engineers with almost surgical precision. Each step reinforced the lesson the POWs could not ignore. American power was not brute force alone. It was intelligence, preparation, and relentless execution. By evening, the last German pockets were neutralized or surrendered. POWs were escorted past entire streets that had been transformed, cleared roads, operational supply hubs, and makeshift bridges spanning what had been impassable rivers. Smoke and dust hung in the air, mingling with the scent of gunpowder and diesel. The captives' silence was profound. They had watched a force that could simultaneously fight, build, heal, and advance without pause. Night fell, and American searchlights scanned the riverfront while engineers continued work, illuminated by flares and lanterns. Tanks and jeeps moved along newly constructed paths, ready for the next day's advance. German prisoners, huddled together, tried to process the scope of what they had witnessed. A war machine that combined human courage with national ingenuity, leaving shock, awe, and silent respect in its wake. As the city of Aachen settled into the quiet of night, POWs could only imagine what lay ahead. The Americans had proven that speed, coordination, and imagination could overcome every defensive assumption, every tactical calculation. They had turned rivers into highways, villages into operational hubs, and fear into evidence of superiority. The lessons of that day would haunt them for the remainder of the war. To face the Americans was to face an unstoppable force. October 15, 1944, Aachen, city center and surrounding countryside. The dawn broke over Aachen, revealing streets cleared of barricades and rubble, bridges repaired, and supply lines humming with movement. American engineers and infantry had transformed the battlefield into a living operation. Every road, every canal, every ruined building repurposed to support the relentless advance. German POWs moved through this orchestrated chaos, their senses overwhelmed. What they had assumed would take days, even weeks, was completed in hours. Tanks rumbled across cobbled streets, their engines shaking dust from ruined rooftops into the damp morning air. Infantry followed in tight formations, rifles ready, while artillery crews adjusted fire with surgical accuracy. POWs watched as every American unit moved in perfect synchronization, a machine guided by intelligence, experience, and determination. Each new advance erased the German calculations that had once promised them security. Along the river, pontoon bridges stretched over swollen waters. Sherman tanks, half-tracks, and trucks moved across them without hesitation. By midday, the POWs were escorted past captured villages where American logistics shone brightest. Trucks delivered fuel and ammunition, cranes unloaded jeeps and artillery, and field hospitals treated the wounded without pause. Engineers repaired roads, set up observation posts, and maintained communications. Every obstacle the Germans had planned to slow the advance was neutralized before it even existed. The Rhine crossings, later that day, became the final spectacle of American dominance. Tanks surged across pontoon bridges, infantry followed, and artillery destroyed the remaining German defensive points with unerring precision. POWs watched from the sidelines, their disbelief now tinged with awe and fear. They had trained for war, but never for an enemy capable of building, supplying, attacking, and reinforcing simultaneously with such efficiency. As evening approached, Aachen was fully in American hands. Streets once defended with confidence were empty. German units either captured or fleeing, leaving behind equipment, fortifications, and shattered morale. POWs stood in silence, witnessing the scale of their defeat not only in manpower but in imagination, organization, and national resolve. The Atlantic Wall, the fortified towns, the supposed impenetrable defenses, all had collapsed under the weight of American ingenuity and relentless momentum. Nightfall brought the final realization. Searchlights illuminated bridges and supply lines. Convoys moved in continuous motion, and tanks patrolled streets ready for any counterattack. German POWs huddled together in temporary pens, processing the events. Bridges had been laid in hours, rivers crossed in minutes, and villages converted into operational hubs almost instantly. They had faced the Americans and found them beyond calculation, beyond expectation, and utterly dominant. As the city slept under the glow of flares and floodlights, one fact became undeniable to every POW. The war was no longer fought with courage alone. America had combined courage, industrial power, innovation, and logistics into a force that was unstoppable, awe-inspiring, and terrifying in its perfection. The lessons of Aachen would remain with them forever. That an enemy could be as relentless as time itself, and that facing America meant facing a nation that refused to fail. By the next dawn, the POWs would be transported to larger camps. Yet the memory of Aachen, the tanks, the engineers, the flawless supply lines, the air supremacy, and the overwhelming order of the American advance would leave them speechless for the remainder of the war. The Americans had not only won the city, they had redefined the meaning of military power, leaving a permanent mark on history and on the minds of those who survived to witness it.